Hello and welcome to CB Insider's virtual fireside chat with Jerrid Grimm, marketer, entrepreneur, co-founder of Pressboard, also acquired by Impact.com in 2022. Jerrid now oversees business development and marketing for Impact.com's expansive portfolio of publisher analytics and measurement tools, including Pressboard, Trackonomics, and the Impact.com marketplace. Jerrid grew up wanting Angela Bauer's job on sitcom Who's the Boss? I think that's amazing. His career has since spanned mobile, experiential, digital, and e-commerce disciplines, working with some of North America's most innovative brands and publishers. Jerrid, thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome.
Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
Great. So now I'd like to introduce our host, Jason Maganoy, publisher of Canadian Business. Take it away, Jason.
Thanks, Chantel. Jerrid, thank you for joining us. So, we're gonna talk about a lot of things about media, but first, my first question is always the same. How are you, and how have you been holding up as we emerge from the pandemic?
What pandemic? Isn't that like, isn't it funny though? So I was thinking about this. 2020, it was my 40th birthday. My birthday is March 5th. And you can imagine March 5th, 2020. So I was going to go to Vegas with friends. We were going to go see a concert, and it all got canceled. Like the day, 2 days before we were going to leave, everything got canceled. The concert, flights, everything. Like it went from zero to that all at once, right? But it was still on the edge, and I hosted, I don't know, a party. We did a house party, played beer pong, like did like a retro kind of like if you were like 18 having a party, and we had like 30 or 40 people in our house. So that's how fast it happened. It went from like, I still had that party, but you could tell everyone was like, ooh, should we be having this party? Right. And then we go into like what seemed like this is going to be the rest of our lives. We're always just gonna, have to wash our hands 1,000 times a day. We're gonna have to stay secluded. And then you kind of fast forward to today. And sometimes I forget that there ever was a pandemic. It seems like life is back to normal. And then other times you see these like little bits and pieces of what's staying. So for me, what's stuck is, for one, I work from home. I'm in my like basement office right now. The whole team is remote. That was like a pretty fundamental change to it. The other part is like, I'm fairly extroverted, and I like, going for lunches and hanging out with people and doing events. And I would say that used to make up a really big part of my life. I would travel every 6 weeks to New York. And I've been to New York once in the last year now, right? So that's a big fundamental change. So there's things that I miss. Like I do miss that human interaction, the constant social side of it. So the extrovert side of me is a bit sad. But then I like discovered this introvert, which is like, I really like my basement. I really like my quiet little basement. And sometimes if I go out with other people for too long, I'm like exhausted. And Christina, my wife, will say, she's like, do you miss your basement? So, but I mean, I'm super grateful. My family's healthy, the business is healthy. I feel good, like just generally grateful for how we were able to kind of manage through it, and the people that I know as well. What about you?
Yeah, so it's so funny because obviously when you're on Facebook memories, you'll just look back and then you can see that stretch from 2020, 2021. Like there was like a stretch where I was sort of like bodybuilding.
Yeah.
So like I'm straight up bodybuilding and I have a beard.
Yeah.
I'm like,
Right.
whoa, that guy's gone. But
right. COVID Jason. That was COVID Jason, right?
and it was funny because it was just like also just sort of seeing just we're trying to getting a sense of the ramifications of what that actually has done to our society, and then sort of experiencing that now I think is going to be very interesting, sort of what it actually means to emerge from it, and the impact it's actually made on us, our communities, each other, etc. So still waiting to sort of get a sense of what that would be. But also on the flip side, very, very grateful. I had a son during the pandemic, like all kinds of stuff. So I feel good too, positive in that sense. But I'd love to ask you about your career. Tell us about your career, and how do you go from being like an entrepreneur to an entrepreneur now at Impact?
You're right. Yeah, I guess it's how you qualify an entrepreneur, right? What kind of criteria you put in there. Chantel kind of led to this in the intro, but I've always wanted to be in advertising. Like since I was I think I was 7 or 8 years old, and I watched this show called Who's the Boss, which is gonna like I used to be able to say like, oh, I watched Who's the Boss, and everyone knew what I was talking about. Now I tell people Who's the Boss, and they have no idea. They don't know who Tony Danza is, or Judith Light, or even like Alyssa Moano, who was like my age
Oh
at the
my
time
God.
on the show. Now she's like, 40 something years old, right? So I watched that show, and for anyone that doesn't know, Angela Bauer was the kind of the matriarch of that show, and she ran an ad agency, and which is why she was so busy, which is why she had to have Tony Danza come and like be the maid and nanny and everything for her household, right? But I thought she had the coolest job. She'd come home and she had these like big storyboards, like those like the kind of black cardboard with this like and magazine mock-ups. And then she'd go to these fancy dinners. She always wore suits. They had like those big like shoulder pads on them. And I was like, that's the coolest job. I don't know what she does, but I want to do that job. And I found out she ran an ad agency. And then I kind of got into the idea of like I started watching commercials more. I started like looking at magazines more. And I told my parents then, I'm like, I'm going to be in advertising. And I was like, yeah, 8 or 9 years old or something. And I actually never varied from that. So I went like all the way through. I did like fly. You could even say like I was did flyer delivery. In a way, I was, delivering flyers. Maybe I was already in advertising and went to college for like majored in marketing, and then kept on kind of going from there. So the way I got into advertising though was like originally just that love of it. And then I started observing what advertising worked on me. And my career path is really simple. It's like when I was into a type of medium, like I was being exposed to a lot, I went and tried to work for that company.
Mm.
So when I was in my like first in like college, I had to drive across. I'm from Edmonton originally, but I lived in Beaumont. So I had to go to school in Edmonton. It was like a 45-minute drive. So I'd see billboards all day, every single day. So I phoned up Pattison, like billboard company, and I was like, I want to work for you guys. And they gave me essentially an internship. And I loved it because I thought billboards worked really well because they were working for me. Then I went into like my early 20s, partied a lot, went to the gym a lot, right? And saw like all those, those ads that were in like the washrooms and the change rooms and stuff like that, owned by a company called New Ad. Owned up New Ad. I was like, hey, I really like your advertising. I'd like to work for you. And they gave me a job, right? Because they don't get calls from people that are like, we love you. I love your advertising. And I've wanted to be in advertising since I was
Yeah.
8. This is like my whole life, right? So worked at New Ad for a while, and then started getting into digital because I was spending more time online. Websites were becoming more common. Got into digital with New Ad. They owned a series of websites. And then once I was kind of in that space, then I really got to know like what the problems were with it. So I found a bunch of problems in digital, and then that was what made me start Pressboard, which is I left New Ad. It was running kind of the digital side of it in Western Canada, and then went and started Pressboard to kind of solve a problem that I found there, and then did Pressboard for 8 years before selling it to Impact. Me and my business partner sold it to. They were acquired by Impact. And the reason we found out about Impact, which is primarily like one of the world's biggest affiliate or CPA performance partnership platforms, was because Pressboard was starting to get into that space. So again, it's like even more meta, right? Like my career was starting to go, or business was going into this direction, and then ended up being acquired by kind of the leader in that space. So a really simple career path, just like follow the advertising mediums that spoke to me the most and tried to go and work for those companies.
Wow. I mean, so when you made the decision to form your own company, like was it were you afraid? Like were you super excited to to dive in and do that?
Yeah, so my dad owned a business my whole life, right? Like he always owned a construction business. And so to me, like the idea of owning a business was the default. Like I thought that's
Mm,
what people did. I didn't know that you could work at companies, right? So my dad always had his own company.
yeah.
They had their ups and downs, but he was a very like good business person, ran this construction company. And so I was never scared of it. To me, it was natural. It was scarier for me to work at a company. Like
Yeah.
that was the thing for me. So I always knew that I was going to start a company again. I was just kind of waiting for the idea that I thought that I would be the one that could, take somewhere, right? Because
Yeah.
I wasn't going to start a billboard company. I wasn't going to start like a indoor advertising company. I probably wasn't going to start a website company. But then when I found this like problem that I thought that I could solve, I went from there. The thing is, when I decided to start Pressboard, yes, there was a clear problem, and I had a business partner who was a tech TM. Uh, but it wouldn't be the ideal time to start a company because we had just had our second kid. So it was like 34, 35 at the time. So we have our second kid, which means my wife goes on mat leave, right? Which means our income is already reduced massively. We just bought a house in North Vancouver, and Vancouver mortgages are insane. So now we're like highly leveraged with a reduced income all at once. And then I decide I'm going to quit my job, which our income goes from double income, one kid, to no income, two kids, and a mortgage. So it sounds really dumb, right? But there's like a method to the madness. Was you can't get a mortgage when you're starting a business. So I had to get the mortgage before I quit so I could qualify for a mortgage. And then I locked in our rate so that at least I knew for the next 5 years, I knew what my monthly mortgage payment was. It wasn't going to go up and down. Probably wasn't the best, like variable would have been better at the time, but I just needed the certainty of what my bills were so that we could plan it out. So it sounds crazy, but it felt really calm to me at the time. Wow. And my wife was actually like, maybe she wasn't quite as calm as I was in the situation because, maybe her dad didn't run a, construction company and she was used to that. But so for me, it wasn't as scary as it felt more natural to do it. But then you don't make any money for a year. And things start to get scarier towards the end of that first year where you're not. Then you start thinking like, oh my God, if this doesn't work out in the next 6 to 8 months, like, do I have to go back and get a job, which would be harder on your ego than your finances, or my ego, I should say, right? Like the idea of failing at the thing that I've worked up to for that long. But luckily we did hit, again, really grateful. We had some good customers right away that paid some of our bills as we kind of develop the technology.
Wow. So, I mean, so we both work in media, we both work in the publishing space. So like my question is, you can be honest, like, are you optimistic about the sector?
I think it'd be very hard to have ever been optimistic about media since like the days of big newspaper companies. Like I think at that time, those things were just throwing off cash.
Yeah.
TV stations, like, I don't know if you remember this, but like if you were the senior salesperson at a major TV network, you were like a god, right? Like you just like your budgets were huge, like the expense budgets. I knew a couple of these people and I'm like, who is this person and how did they get to live like this, right? Because I think so at that time, I think media was it was clearly like this money printing machine that was going up and up and up. And then I think like when the internet basically started, there was cracks that started to show in that and it started being more distributed. And I would say like since that time, media has been in a state of flux of some kind, right? Ups and downs and chasing after something. But it has like incredible staying power. Like it has incredible resilience. If you consider that 23 years ago, the market really changed fundamentally. And it's still like, adapted and go through this. So I think it's a very like resilient industry that like is willing to adapt over time. It probably didn't have to for like 50 years. And then all of a sudden it's just constant change as it moves forward from there. So I'm optimistic because I think the people in it are really resilient. I think the business models are adaptable. And I think it's moved from like this industry that was very reluctant to change and like kind of like just stuck in its old ways to being used to that. It's constantly going to change. Next month isn't going to look like last month. And I think that's what makes me optimistic about the space.
Wow. So, I mean, that actually is a really good like segue into my next question, which is about change in consumer behavior. Like there was like the internet, and then there was like the mobile phone and social media, and then the pandemic happened. Like it radically changed consumer behavior. I there was a time where I had not been in a grocery store for a really long time. Then I went in one. I was like, oh my gosh, like, and I was like buying things that I would never buy because I was like taking these like cookies and going, let me get these. So my question is like, it seems like you talked about the adaptability of media companies, but at the same time, they seem to be slow. Like they seem to be slow at adapting. So how can media companies adapt? Like how can they adapt to changing consumer behaviors and preferences? And how can they do this quickly? And how can they do this to stay relevant and profitable?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of like simplify the idea of a media business down to like it's only three things at its core. It's like you create some content, whether that's news or reviews or lifestyle, it doesn't matter. You create some information, like something interesting or entertaining or educational, and then you have to distribute it, and then you monetize it. Those are the only three things: create content, distribute it to people, and then make money off of it in some way. I would say that the part that has been disrupted the most over the last, let's say, 20, 30 years has actually been the monetization side of it, right? Because if you think of someone that was writing for a newspaper in like 1980, and if you took that same person and you move them to today, they probably are writing for a website. So fundamentally, like content creation hasn't changed that much, right? If they were a reporter then, they might be a reporter now. If they were, doing some sort of like, here's what's going on in your city, places to stay, they're still doing that now. So content creation hasn't really fundamentally changed that much. Distribution has changed, but not as much as people think, I wouldn't say. So it went from like dropping off a newspaper on someone's porch, right? Or having them get it through an antenna or through like some sort of like TV signal, and then it appearing on this box in their room, right? In their living room. And then it went to, okay, instead of it being the information being inside of this newspaper, it's going to be inside of this news feed. Like even the naming barely even changed,
Yeah.
right? So distribution, yes, it changed, but it was the same idea. Like still create some interesting stuff, get it out to people in whatever way is the best way to do it. But then monetization changed massively. So you go from like this idea of, hey, the way to advertise is to just buy a full page ad or a commercial on TV, pay a fortune for it, and like kind of guesstimate how many people might be seeing that. Yeah, like I don't know if you remember the way they used to survey TV, but like you would get like a survey and you'd like fill out what you were watching at different times in the day, like radio too, right? Like I remember getting mailed
Oh my
one.
God.
It came with a $5 bill, and I had the survey, and I was supposed to like write down what radio stations I was listening to every single day at what times. I didn't do it because I was like 20, like as if I'm going to do this. But that's what it was. It was just like, hey, listen, this stuff works. We don't know exactly how. It's a bit of a black box here. But then you move over to digital. Now you have like programmatically served ads that fundamentally changes the way advertising works. Then you move into like these other things like, branded content or affiliate or like these different ways to monetize. So the biggest shakeup to me is monetization. And it's very difficult to run a business when the way that you make money changes regularly, but your cost structure is
Yes.
still creating content and distributing it to people, and that doesn't fundamentally change. So I think that's why it's slow to change. Is like if you're a business, changing your monetization model is very, very difficult to do. So I'd say that's why media companies are maybe stereotypically seen as a little bit slow to change. Is like, why would you want to? You finally figure out a monetization strategy that works.
Yeah.
You really want to shake that part up again?
Wow. That's a that is a really great way to position it. Um, which like takes me to my next question, which is there are people who are like I'll read online. People are starting media companies still. Like there's some
Yeah.
really interesting organizations that are starting up right now. There are people who are content creators, et cetera. They're all in a way little mini media companies. So for people who are watching right now who are gonna want to start a media company, what are three things that they have to do? So like what are table stakes for you in terms of beginning in the media business?
Yeah. So this is going to be the opinion of one, right? And my
Yeah.
own experience. So like know that there's a lot of bias in this, but I don't think that anyone should start like a media company. I like the idea of people starting businesses. I was raised by an entrepreneur. I got into it. I think that's a really like valuable experience for people. It's really interesting and challenging. So the way that I look at how you should start a business is like, first of all, you have to be like massively immersed into that business so that you understand like the nuances of it, the people of it, like what its purpose is, all the rest of it. So if you can immerse yourself, so if you want to be a media business, I would say like immerse yourself into it. I know that there's, a couple people that just came into it from some other place, looked at it with fresh eyes and made something successful. But most of the people that are successful at starting a business in an industry is because they have domain expertise. They understand that business really well. They care about that business, and it's a marathon, right? It's not a sprint. Like running a business is a marathon. I was told that early on, and it's very true. Like It's not like a 1 year thing. It's like, think of this being 10 or 20 years of your life. So immerse yourself in it first. So if that's media, if you want to get in, you should immerse yourself into it. You should know all aspects of it, try and work in that space, try and read as much as you can or see as much as you can. And then the second thing is, once you're immersed, is like, find a problem. If
Mhm.
you can't find a problem, I don't think there's a business there. So if you're just going to be the like nth publisher producing technology news, and you're not solving a problem, like that information is out there, I don't see that as really a sustainable business, or really even like a worthwhile thing to do. Just go work at one of the companies that are already doing it and make them better, right? Like that's what needs to be done. So what I did the way that I started my business was, I was working at NewAd. I wasn't planning on leaving. We had all these websites. We were starting to sell these more complicated advertising campaigns, which we called sponsored content at the time, or branded content.
Wow.
And we were mainly selling banner ads before, which I hate. But no one really likes banner ads, but they make money for the industry, and advertisers like them sometimes. So we started getting into these complicated campaigns, and all of a sudden we went from spending a few minutes a day reporting back to clients on the progress of the campaigns to like several hours. So at one point we were
Mm.
spending 4 hours a day. Team members were spending 4 hours a day just building campaign reports, sending them to the advertiser every single day. And we were starting to lose money if you looked at our P&L. So we were going from like being barely profitable to losing money with no path to profitability again, because our time was being like just eaten up by these very manual tasks. So I went to my business partner, who's a software engineer, and he said, you just have humans doing stuff that humans aren't very good at. Why don't we just build technology to do it? So we actually wrote down, while I was still in New York, we wrote down every single minute that I was spending and my team was spending on every single task. It was 235 hours to do a campaign. And we analyzed what we could do with technology, and we thought we could get it down to 35 hours. That's it. That was the business plan. Takes 235. We think we can get it to 35. I pitched NewAd to hire developers and us to build it internally, but that's not their core business. They're not a technology business. They're a media business. So I quit, and then that's how I started the business. And for 2 years, we just took that original spreadsheet of 235 hours and we just picked away at it for 2 years
Wow.
until we got to that point. And then we solved it. And then I licensed it back to my old company, right? That was our first customer. And then the New York Times was like our third customer, I think. Our second customer was Hearst in the US, with all the Canadian publishers. They kind of ran into this problem. I was just a little bit early to the problem, right? I was experiencing it, and then they experienced it a couple of years later. So by the time we had the technology ready, they needed it. So that was the kind of luck, was that you hope to find a problem that lots of people have, but make sure you have the problem yourself first, and then just spend as long as it takes to solve that problem. So if I'm starting, those are my three pieces of advice. Like, immerse yourself in the industry or in the space. Find a real problem, like a real problem that's out there that you think lots of people have, but give yourself the problem first, and then spend your time as a company solving that problem. And that's
Wow.
it. That's all I would advise.
And that's amazing, because this idea of the monetization comes in the solving of the problem.
Yes.
Because, like, and what you just described too, like that, and it helps sort of like create that sales flywheel, like the performance, and reflecting back that great performance with ease just gives the advertiser the confidence and the trust they need to continue working with you. So it's a really great return of investment. So that takes me though to my next piece, which is about, like, and we had talked about it before we even started the Fireside Chat, but like artificial intelligence, it's like everywhere.
Yeah.
It's all everyone is talking about. Like, we're two AIs right now. We're two agents. We're not even here. This is literally two agents, two chat GPTs talking. But in all honesty, like, we had just gone through a disruption. The pandemic was a disruption. Now there's another one happening right now. So what role do you think AI will play in the future of media, and how can companies prepare for it? Well, what does preparing for it even mean?
Right. I'm getting like really deep into this, right? So I was kind of mentioning to you that I'm maybe going a little too far down some of these 3 hour podcasts where, you're talking to the guest is someone that's saying that AI is going to like take out all humans, right? So I'm a little too far down that path. But as far as like from a business standpoint, I use Chat GPT. Let's first of all kind of classify what we're talking about. We're not really talking about AI right now in the world. We're talking about Chat GPT. Right. So
Yes.
AI existed 2 years ago. No one was talking about it. All of a sudden, there's this website that we can go to and we can type stuff in and we can experience something that is almost like a fiction, like it's almost a science fiction movie, right? Or the first touches of it. And what, so if we say like, how is Chat GPT going to change it? I think what's really happening is we've figured out how to make a machine understand human language, which we always thought was unreachable. Like if a dog can't learn English or another language,
Right. Yeah.
can a computer ever do it? And I think what we've realized as like a society or as like humanity is that it's not that complicated. Like language isn't as complicated and as like mystical and everything as we thought. It's just knowing what word to put after the previous word in a row. And if you can train a brain on like an unlimited amount of data, it can do that really effectively, right? So I kind of think of this as we're just getting like the very first taste of it, and this is an exponential curve of technology that we haven't seen for a very long time. When I say exponential, I was explaining this to like my 12-year-old the other day, what exponential means and why we can't even conceive of this idea of exponentiality. And I gave this example. Math might not be exactly right on this, but I was like, if I give you a penny this morning, right, with breakfast, you get a penny, and then I am willing to double that penny for you every 20 minutes all day long. So, in 20 minutes now, I'll make it 2 pennies. In 40 minutes, you're going to have 4 pennies, 8, 16, and so on. And I said exponential, which is doubling every period of time over an expanded period of time. The math would work out that by dinner time, he would have $10 million. Right? By bedtime, he'd be a billionaire. And when he woke up the next morning, he would have $100 trillion.
Yeah.
So like you can't imagine. So let's say that ChatGPT is the penny that you start with at breakfast, right? That exponential growth means that like what we're dealing with right now is not even close to what, and it's only 4 months old. So it is growing at that exponential. So let's say every 4 months it doubles. In 2 or 3 years, like we're talking about that penny turning into $1 trillion, right? Instead of that. So I think that we're just kind of like touching the surface of it. I recommend that people use it. So I use ChatGPT every day. I recommend like my whole team use it every single day so that you understand it. Because the analogy that I use is like, for I think I don't know how long it was, maybe like 5,000 years, people had horse and buggy. Like it dates back to like 3000 BC, where this like horse and buggy, and then in 1886 or something, I think it's Carl Benz invents like the automobile that we know today, combustion engine automobile, and then by 1910, so like 30 years later or less, the horse and buggy is obsolete. So 5,000 years of something new is invented, and 30 years later, that thing that was around for 5,000 years is obsolete, right? And then it actually doesn't change much. Like the 1920 Model T is not that much difference even from the Tesla electric vehicle today. It's like 4 wheels, drives forward, has some sort of like propulsion. So you have these like moments in time that are very, very short, but they fundamentally change an entire like society or otherwise. And I do think that AI is that moment. I think that is like, so you have to decide, if you were driving a horse and carriage before, are you going to stick to driving that horse and carriage and like kind of put your blinders on along with the horse's blinders to be like, this thing isn't coming? Or are you going to learn how to drive the car? Just learn how to drive the car and then it won't disrupt you. So you have to choose, are you the driver of the technology or are you the horse? And if you're the horse, then that's probably not the best position to be in right now. So, people are scared about this though, right? Like, hey, I'm a copywriter and this thing can write copy decent.
Yeah.
I would say learn how to use it to do better prompts so that you can write copy, because you don't want to be the horse, you want to be the driver. That's kind of my view on it.
Wow. And it's so funny because like what you're describing is, we've started integrating it into our department, like just for simple tasks, like whether it be call to action for a marketing campaign or et cetera. And I remember like, so we we create great content. We have great writers at our organization. And I remember we were doing like a marketing campaign for an event that we were doing. And it was like, it's just like great copy. Like, check out this incredible event that's coming up. It's going to be awesome, brilliant thinkers, all this great stuff. And then I took the copy and I just said to ChatGPT, hey, can you sort of like make this more sales oriented and simplify it? And what should the call to action be? And then it went from being sort of like experience this great event. The call to action was buy tickets. And then as soon as we started using that as the call to action, we sold more tickets. It was just really funny just how the simple change in call to action was just, that was the suggestion. Yeah. But like, and that idea, like going back to that idea of like something is happening and then there's a moment and then things become obsolete. Then all of a sudden the world is just different and you're part of it and you're just doing that thing. Like what happened to the metaverse? Like it seemed like that was going to be the thing. Like I saw a New York Times piece where Mark Zuckerberg did an interview in the metaverse with someone from the New York Times that looked really hilarious. But like, do you think that that's done, or do you think that virtual reality, augmented reality, do you think that's going to sort of have an impact in the digital media landscape?
Okay, so I have a bit of a contrarian view on this, which is like, I think the metaverse already is happening. It's just, it's not being run by Facebook. So I have a 9-year-old and a 12-year-old, and the 12-year-old plays Fortnite, has currency in Fortnite, uses that currency to buy clothing, attends events on a set schedule where he's like, Friday at 8 o'clock, I'm really busy. Me and my friends have this whatever release it is, the new season release, and I need to be there. And I'm like, well, can't you go later? And he's like, no, it's like, it's happening at 8 o'clock. So, but he just goes down to the basement and he goes in his like gaming room kind of thing where the TV and his PS5 is. But he's living in a metaverse, right? He's already living in this place where he's using a digital currency to buy himself digital items, attend events with his social group. He has friends, and he's like, we're very limited on how much we let him. Like he's got like maybe an hour on like some weekdays, couple hours on the weekend. So he's very limited in it, but he still was able to build this entire world where he has friends that he doesn't know in person that live in other places, right? He's like, oh yeah, Nathan's going to be there or whatever, right? And I'm like, who's Nathan? Like, Nathan's in the Philippines, right? So I watched this happen and I'm like, that's the metaverse. It's not like me and you putting on a headset and then having a boardroom meeting where we're just sitting there, right? Like, so I think that's what's happened is it's just this idea that you can live in the digital space different from your physical space. And I think that's occurring. I just don't think that Meta, the company, is the one that's operating it. I think it's a mixture of Fortnite and Roblox. Right now it's in the gaming space, but I think that'll always expand, right?
Yes. And that was sort of the thing about like, I love Roblox. Like, for example, there was I know this little kid and she's like, she loves Restaurant Tycoon. So she's a restaurateur, like, like an 8-year-old restaurateur in Roblox. And it's funny. Like she's like, so should I hire a Mexican chef or a Chinese chef? And I'm like, oh my God. And she's like looking at their resumes and I'm like, wow, like, and it's interesting because she does have a full-on community, but the community also exists in her building. They live in the same buildings. They're upstairs. So it's like, it's really cool. Just sort of that blending of sort of virtual and real life, augmented, etc. But so we're talking about like metaverse, AI, all of this stuff, like everything emerging from the pandemic, all these things we have to prepare for as a media business. But like, how do we get better at the things that we need to be good at? Like, that's something that I think, going back to this idea of core business, like data and insights, like, how do we get better at that? How do we get better at building a revenue business? How do we get better at grabbing attention in a super crowded environment? Just what do you recommend for media companies to just get better at the core things? Like, one could be get Pressboard. Is there anything else anything else you could recommend on that front?
Yeah. So again, I kind of always go back to this, like, what is the fundamental purpose of the business, right? So Pressboard's fundamental purpose was to save publishers time with campaign reporting, right? And yes, it expanded beyond just campaign reporting and save time in a bunch of other ways, but that's still like, that's the reason for existing. It's not to do anything else. So if AI can help us make that true faster, we're going to incorporate it. We're not going to go and build some chatbot for fun, right? Because it's not our core purpose. So is a core purpose of a media company to create content, or is it to distribute that content? Right. Or is it to figure out how to monetize content, or whatever the thing is? So I think the thing that's happening right now is, which has been happening for a while, is the idea of content creation is become highly democratized, and I would say like anybody can do it. There's like 4 billion people that have access to social networks that can create content. I was talking to this, or I saw this publisher speaking that was doing kind of like horoscope articles, and they produced 10,000 new articles for the cost before that it would take to do one article.
Huh.
So I'm not saying that these 10,000 articles are good.
Wow.
But what it does mean is that the internet will be flooded with content. So a media company, I don't think their purpose is to create content. I don't think that's their purpose, but I do think it's to like curate, right? It's to decide, and that's always existed in media. It was like whether it's Lloyd Robertson, right, that's like on the news and is curating the world's events down to like a 20-minute segment that everyone can watch, or a newspaper that only has so many pages, or you know, now on like websites. I think media companies' strength is curating this fire hose that's actually going to be like 10,000 times more content all of a sudden. I think the idea of a curator is more important now than it was before, right? So I would say like for kind of around that idea, like, and that kind of leads into like, well, how do you decide what's truth and the rest of it? Sometimes it doesn't have to be truth. It just has to be curation, right? Like there's no true favorite runner for me. But a shoe blog could do a really good job of curating the world for me in like a seamless way. So to me, that's the purpose of a media company. And I don't know if everyone believes that, right? But that's my personal view on why I think media is valuable. So I think leaning into that and saying, you know, insights and data now, why do we care about all these insights and data? Like, is it data for data's sake? Or is it because if we have all these insights and data, we can better at our core purpose, which is to curate the world's information for our audience in some way?
I love that. The idea, and that takes me to my next question about the curation is phenomenal. I love that. I love having the ability to go to a source, get really, really great curated information. It just sort of adds a ton of value to my life. But then one of the things that we're encountering now, especially now that there's also AI doing everything too, but like this idea of misinformation, fake news, which in a way is its own type of curation. Like people tend to really kind of congregate around stuff like that, and they seem to enjoy it. So my question is, we want to make sure that our content is accurate, reliable, factual, truthful. Is that drive against misinformation? Is that kind of curation? Is that enough to sort of break through sort of the noise out there?
Yeah. So if we kind of go through that exponential curve, and let's say there's a million articles out there right now, we have to assume that there's going to be trillions of articles that are going to be in a very short amount of time. So the idea of like, you know, curating all of this or finding out what's true or not true, truth kind of only really matters in news. It doesn't matter that much in which headphones are the best. You know what I mean? Like, so I think like defining where misinformation happens, because you could just say that advertising is misinformation. It's every brand saying that they're the best at stuff, right?
No.
So I think truth matters mostly, and disinformation, misinformation matters most in this kind of news category where people are making like decisions for their family, for their government, for the place they live, for the people they're with. And I don't know what the solution is to that when you dump like a trillion pieces of content onto people. So I do think it comes down to trust, though. Like I trust my friend to tell me about, you know, what golf course go to because I know he's an avid golfer. So I just trust him, right? I just trust. So the media company, if they're the curator, you have to like be trustworthy, which means you probably should lean into like what makes you trustworthy. And then truth is like, is it true or not true is less important to me than did this media company tell me their bias? And I understand their bias and I'm willing to like get the curation from that bias. So, you know, tell me if you're a little bit left leaning. That's cool. I'm a bit left leaning. I'm open to that. Just tell me up front. Don't tell me that you're unbiased and then have a view on things. So I think that's what's going to happen is people are going to like have to expose their algorithms almost, even if it's just a mental model of it. And then people can make a decision on it. That's I think the only other way to solve this is to like, if AI creates the problem of too much content, you probably need an AI to police it. And then we're like in a Will Smith iRobot movie all of a sudden, right? So I hope that we can just move towards more like a clear idea on why stuff is being curated in what way.
Yeah, and that is going back to that idea of the trust. Like it just part of my experience on like the landscape of trillions of articles or pieces of content out there is that like it seems like no one trusts anything.
Yeah.
Like someone says, "Oh, it's this." Like I remember I got into an argument. I was like, "Well, it's from the New York Times." Oh, wow, that blowing me up there. That whole thing with Elon about like the CBC is 69% government funded.
Yeah.
I'm like, holy. So, this idea of like, how do you, in an environment like this for a media company, if you had the ability to build trust and build it and have staying power and have it build trust quickly, that would be phenomenal and a really great way to sort of win in an environment like this. My final question is, what is next for you, and what is next for Impact?
Yeah. So Impact acquired, when they acquired us, they acquired the entire company, all the staff. So like when we were looking at different M&As from different people, a couple of things that we wanted to join a company where they saw value in us and we saw value in them, and so we could grow. And we wanted the team to be able to come over and be able to like continue their careers, going from a small Canadian startup to a much larger organization. You can imagine that those people now have all these great career opportunities. So we wanted that possibility for them. And me and TM are super happy there. Like, of course, Impact, someone from Impact is going to see this. So, but we genuinely are like very happy with like the way that Impact has brought us in and how they're kind of like rolling out Pressboard and bringing us into the larger product there. So that's my plan. My plan is to like, I'm really a person that needs to immerse themselves in everything. And I find this affiliate space and this partnership space very intriguing. I still am like a marketer, right? So like the 8-year-old me hasn't changed their mind, right? I have no other discernible skills. Like that's it. This is all I know how to do. It's all I want to do. So I want to keep getting challenged, and affiliate and partnerships are like very challenging because I don't know them well enough, right? So I can learn a bunch in a very short period of time. It's like in the Matrix where like she puts on that thing and she figures out how to drive a helicopter, fly a helicopter. I feel like I'm like putting on this Impact hat. And then in like a couple of years, I'm going to be able to know everything about affiliate and partnerships. So that's for me, right? Like I'm just trying to like learn really quickly in it and then adapt that, because I do think it's a really interesting model where an advertiser can say, my entire marketing spend is going to be based on how much product you sell on my behalf, and I'll give you a portion of that revenue. It's a very clean advertising model that I'm not used to in the brand world, where it's just like, people are feeling good. We hope it translates in sales. We can't prove it. This is like such a provable place. And then for Impact, it's this idea of expanding the idea of partnerships. So yes, you're still going to have like, I'm a headphone manufacturer. I want to work with a bunch of tech blogs that are reviewing headphones, and I want to make sure that they're profiling me in some way or that they know about my products, etc. And then you have sponsored content, which is the new kind of partnerships that we brought in there, where you can do like, hey, I just want to build awareness. I might not even want to sell a car. I just want to build awareness about this car. So that's our part. But there's this really other interesting thing, which is just like, maybe it doesn't have to be an advertiser and a publisher. Maybe those aren't the only two. Maybe you could have two advertisers work together on partnerships. So I have an audience of parents that are like really into my like kid food or whatever. And then you want to talk to parents because you have a credit card that is made for families, right? Like, so why don't we just refer business to each other as businesses? And I think that's a really like kind of intriguing future of this idea that it isn't just an advertiser and a publisher. It's like just two companies that have like a shared interest that can compensate each other in an economic model to like drive each other's business forward. And that's essentially like how I kind of view it. And I think the way that Impact views it.
Well, Jerrid, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us today. But I'm stealing a lot of these ideas. Every time I am happy that every time I do talk to you, I do write things down and I do use them in my day-to-day work. It's been very impactful, but thank you again for taking the time, and talk to you soon.
I'm happy to do it. And I mean, we've been working together with the whole kind of St. Joseph group for a while. And I just think the idea of having very strong viewpoint publications in their own niches, right? Like know about business and entrepreneurship, know about the city of Toronto. I do think that's the future of media. I think the idea of very generic kind of things is going away. I think the social networks have taken over the generic, like, hey, I want to know about everything at once. But I think this idea of like understanding a niche incredibly well has a very like long future to it. So I appreciate you having me on, and it's always good to chat with you. So thanks.